I'm Evelyn Harper, 27 years old, and I felt like I was finally getting my footing in the buzzing, relentless energy of Brooklyn, New York. My days were a blur of patient charts, hurried consultations, and the constant hum of medical machinery at the busy city hospital where I worked as a nurse, often pulling long, demanding shifts. When I wasn't caring for others, I found solace in the quiet corners of my apartment, a small two-bedroom space I shared in the heart of Flatbush. I loved the vibrant street life, the distant siren songs, and the comforting rhythm of the city. My apartment was my sanctuary, my personal space where I could shed the day's stress and recharge. I had worked incredibly hard to afford this slice of Brooklyn life, and I prided myself on keeping my home organized and clean, a stark contrast to the often chaotic environment of my work. I was a meticulous person, finding comfort in order, and I truly believed that a clean space helped clear a cluttered mind. But for the past year, my peaceful sanctuary had been slowly, steadily eroding. My roommate, Chloe, a young woman I had met through an online housing group, had started out seemingly normal, but had slowly revealed a habit that was turning my world upside down. It wasn't just a minor annoyance. It was a festering, growing problem that had taken root in our shared kitchen, specifically in the sink. Chloe, for reasons I couldn't fathom, had developed a truly disgusting habit of leaving her dirty dishes. Not just for a few hours, but for days, sometimes stretching into a full week, even longer. I had tried to be patient, understanding that life in New York could be busy, but this went beyond simple forgetfulness. The problem wasn't just the sight of the dishes, though that was bad enough, a constant mountain of greasy plates, crusty pots, and sticky silverware. It was the smell that truly gnawed at me, a sour, putrid odor that permeated the small apartment, clinging to the curtains, seeping into my clothes. Then came the mold, blooming in grotesque patches on forgotten food, transforming innocent pasta into a fuzzy alien landscape. And the bugs. Small, dark fruit flies buzzed lazily around the decaying food, a constant, irritating cloud, occasionally joined by a bolder cockroach scurrying across the countertop, a horrifying indicator of the growing infestation. I had even found a fork once, seemingly welded to a plate by a hardened, greenish-brown substance that I could only describe as ancient cheese cement. Every single time I stepped into the kitchen, a wave of disgust and anger washed over me, making me feel trapped and helpless in my own home. I felt deeply unsatisfied, as if my personal peace was being stolen by someone who simply did not care. Chloe, my supposed co-inhabitant, had become my nemesis, not through malicious intent, I hoped, but through pure, unadulterated neglect. I, being the kind of person who always tried to find a reasonable solution, began my efforts to solve the problem with gentle approaches. First, I tried the direct, polite method. "Hey Chloe," I'd say with a forced smile, gesturing vaguely towards the overflowing sink. "Could you maybe get to these dishes soon? They're really starting to pile up." Chloe would nod, offer a quick, "Oh yeah, totally my bad," and then nothing would happen. The dishes would remain, a monument to unfulfilled promises. I tried leaving little notes, carefully written on colorful sticky pads placed strategically on top of the grimiest pile. Just a friendly reminder to clear the sink. Or let's keep our kitchen sparkling. The notes would often be ignored, sometimes even found crumpled on the floor, adding insult to injury. I even tried, in moments of sheer desperation and a longing for a clean kitchen, to do a few of Chloe's dishes myself, hoping that a clean slate would encourage Chloe to keep it that way. But it never worked. Within hours, or certainly by the next morning, new dirty plates would appear, nestled among the few clean ones, a fresh testament to Chloe's indifference. Each attempt felt like a tiny defeat, and the problem only grew bigger and more serious. The mold became more aggressive, spreading its fuzzy tendrils. The fruit flies multiplied, a constant cloud around the sink, making cooking and even just walking through the kitchen an exercise in holding my breath and swatting. I started eating out more, even though it stretched my budget, just to avoid the horror that was my own kitchen. I'd bring home takeout, eat it quickly in my bedroom, and immediately dispose of the packaging, feeling like a refugee in my own home. The emotional toll was immense. I felt a constant hum of resentment beneath my skin. I had worked so hard to build a life for myself in this demanding city, and to have my most basic comfort, my home, be ruined by someone else's laziness felt profoundly unfair. I spent my days dealing with medical emergencies, saving lives, and then I came home to domestic biohazard. The internal conflict was fierce. I wanted to be understanding, but I was slowly losing my mind. Then came the night that pushed me over the edge, plunging me into a feeling of absolute despair. I had just finished a 12-hour shift, one of the most grueling of the week. It had been an emergency room nightmare, a nonstop barrage of critical cases, and I was physically and emotionally drained. All I wanted was to shed my scrubs, take a hot shower, and maybe make a simple cup of tea in a clean kitchen. I opened the apartment door, the familiar sense of Brooklyn wafting in behind me, but they were quickly overpowered by the sickening, sweet-sour smell emanating from the kitchen. I peered in and my heart sank, a heavy, cold stone in my chest. The sink wasn't just full, it was overflowing, a truly monstrous mound of crusty plates, greasy pans, and slimy bowls, reaching a new, horrifying peak. There were plates with dried, cracked eggs, bowls with a week-old, furry chili, and cups stained with forgotten coffee. A colony of fruit flies danced a morbid ballet over the entire disgusting spectacle. A fresh wave of anger, hotter and more intense than anything I'd felt before, surged through me. This wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a direct assault on my peace, a complete disregard for my well-being. I felt a tremor in my hands. I grabbed my phone and without thinking sent a terse text message to Chloe. "The sink is disgusting again, you need to clean it now." My phone buzzed almost instantly with Chloe's reply. "I will do it when I can stop nagging." That was it. That dismissive, uncaring phrase, typed so casually, broke something inside me. All the exhaustion from my shift, all the accumulated frustration and disgust from the past year exploded into a blinding fury. It was as if Chloe had just declared war on my sanity. In that moment, I was certain that all was lost. There was no reasoning, no polite request, no note that would ever change anything. My home was ruined, and I felt utterly powerless, completely defeated, and utterly disrespected. A chilling calm descended over me, sharper and more potent than my earlier rage. My hand stopped trembling, replaced by a cold, steady resolve. I walked deliberately into the kitchen, the stench almost a physical blow, but I barely registered it. This was it. The final, last-ditch effort. No more notes, no more polite requests, no more hoping for change. This was a statement, a desperate act to reclaim my space, my sanity, my very sense of self. I grabbed a pair of latex gloves from my nursing bag, pulling them on with surgical precision. Then I began. I took every single dirty dish, every crusted pot, every slimy cup, and every piece of silverware from the sink and the countertops, my movements methodical and unhesitating. The feeling of the cold, greasy ceramic, the sticky mold-encrusted food beneath my gloved fingers, would normally have made me gag, but now I felt nothing but a cold determination. I scraped off the most obvious clumps of moldy food and rotting leftovers directly into the trash can, not because I cared about Chloe's bed, but because I wanted to ensure maximum impact. I filled a pitcher with the foul, standing dishwater from the sink, the murky liquid thick with food particles and a faint iridescent sheen. With my arms laden with the disgusting spoils, I marched down the short hallway to Chloe's bedroom. The door was slightly ajar, a sliver of light escaping. I pushed it open all the way. Chloe's room, usually a chaotic mess of clothes and textbooks, was now about to become something far worse. With a deep, steadying breath, I began my work. I started with the dishes, carefully placing each one face down on Chloe's pristine white duvet cover. Plates, bowls, mugs, each one carrying its own unique ecosystem of decay, were laid out like a macabre feast. A pan with burnt-on remnants of what looked like ancient scrambled eggs went onto Chloe's pillow. A glass with a crusty ring of dried milk found its home right beside it. I made sure that every single item that had contributed to my misery found its place on that bed. And then, the grand finale. I took the pitcher of putrid dishwater and with a swift, decisive motion, poured it slowly over Chloe's pillow, letting the sickening liquid seep into the fabric, staining it with a dark, greasy bloom. It dripped onto the duvet, mingling with the food scraps, creating an undeniable, pervasive horror. I stood back, breathing heavily, looking at the destruction. The once clean bed, now a landscape of filth, mold, and rot. I had ruined Chloe's bed absolutely and completely. I went back to my own room, closed my door, and sat on my bed, the adrenaline still coursing through my veins, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I didn't know what would happen next, but a strange sense of liberation, mingled with a tremor of fear, washed over me. It wasn't long before Chloe returned home. I heard the key in the lock, then the creak of the front door. A few moments of silence, then a sharp, disbelieving gasp from Chloe's room, followed by a blood-curdling scream that ripped through the apartment. "Evelyn, what the hell did you do?" Chloe burst out of her room, her face contorted in a mask of horror and fury. Her hair was wild, her eyes wide with disbelief as she pointed a trembling finger down the hallway. You psycho, you crossed the line. Look what you did to my bed, my bed." I walked calmly out of my room, meeting Chloe's gaze with a steady, unyielding stare. "It was either that or I was going to lose my mind, Chloe. I've asked you, pleaded with you for a year. You left me no choice." Chloe began to pace, her voice rising in pitch. "You are insane. You can't just destroy my property. I'm calling the landlord. I'm getting you kicked out. You're going to pay for this, you hear me? You are absolutely going to pay." The confrontation was exactly what I had expected, a fiery explosion, and in that moment I braced myself for the inevitable battle, prepared to fight for my right to live in a clean home, even if it meant losing my apartment. But the consequences of my choice, though initially explosive, unfolded in a way I could never have predicted. The landlord was indeed called, and a heated, tense meeting was scheduled for the following morning. I went to bed that night, not with triumph, but with a strange mix of fear and a grim satisfaction. I knew I had gone too far, but I also knew I couldn't have lived another day in that unbearable situation. The next morning, a miracle or perhaps just sheer exhaustion on both sides occurred. Instead of going straight to the landlord meeting, Chloe surprisingly knocked on my door. Her face was still blotchy from crying, but her eyes held a different emotion, not just anger, but something akin to weariness. Can we just talk? She mumbled, her voice surprisingly small. I, equally worn down, nodded slowly. We went to a small cafe down the street, away from the scene of the crime, away from the tension that filled our apartment. We sat across from each other, the aroma of fresh coffee and pastries filling the air, a stark contrast to the smells we had left behind. For the first time in a very long time, we had an adult discussion without yelling, without accusation. Chloe, between sips of her latte, slowly started to explain. She admitted that she had been going through a tremendously difficult time, juggling a demanding new job with some personal struggles she hadn't wanted to share. She confessed that her neglect of the dishes wasn't intentional malice, but a symptom of feeling overwhelmed and spiraling, and she honestly hadn't realized how much it was affecting me or how truly bad it had gotten. She apologized sincerely for her behavior and for the constant stress she had caused. I, listening to Chloe's words, felt a surprising wave of empathy. It didn't excuse Chloe's actions, but it explained them. And in that quiet cafe, I found myself apologizing too, for taking such an extreme measure, for destroying Chloe's belongings, for the shock and distress I had caused. It was a raw, honest conversation, filled with genuine remorse and a desperate need for peace. We talked for a long time, laying out expectations and boundaries for the apartment, agreeing on a clear chore schedule, and committing to open communication. I told Chloe that I would, of course, buy her a brand new bed, and promised that such an extreme incident would never happen again. The landlord, when we finally spoke to him together, was relieved to hear we had come to a resolution. He gave us a stern warning but allowed us to stay, noting the unusual and sudden agreement between us. In the weeks that followed, a new normal settled into our Brooklyn apartment. The kitchen remained clean, the sink sparkling. Chloe, true to her word, kept up with her responsibilities, and I noticed a lighter, less burdened quality about my roommate. I, in turn, found a renewed sense of peace in my home, the sanctuary I had almost lost. I learned a profound lesson about boundaries, about speaking up firmly before resentment festered, but also about the unexpected paths resolution can take. Sometimes, it seemed, the most extreme action born of desperation could force a conversation that polite requests never could. And while I hoped to never resort to such measures again, I knew that sometimes, a little controlled chaos could clear the air, quite literally, and open the door to genuine understanding. I had faced my nemesis, unleashed my fury, and instead of destruction, I had unexpectedly found a path to peace, and perhaps even a fragile new friendship, or at the very least, a much more respectful living arrangement. The apartment truly felt like home again, and I, now able to relax in my own kitchen, felt a deep and unexpected fulfillment, ready to face the demands of the city once more, but this time with a cleaner, calmer home to return to.